how's your lover heart doing? Especially if you're a man, how's your lover heart doing? I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me. As you will hear in this episode, your lover heart is something God gave you and that evil hates. What has happened to the sexuality of men in our culture? Some would say, well, our culture is too sexualized, but there's a lot going on in men's hearts and souls that gets left behind when all we say is, don't do it. We're going to unpack all of that in this fascinating conversation. My guest is Sam Jolman. He is a trauma therapist with over 20 years experience specializing in men's issues. He has been trained in narrative-focused trauma care through the Allender Center, a beautiful place. He is now in Colorado Springs helping men deal with some of these issues. I know that you will find this conversation fascinating. Sam's recent book, The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality. It's rare that I have written so many notes as I have gone through a book. As you know, I talk with a lot of authors on this program, but the notes that I took going through Sam's material, just awesome. You will love this. So here is Sam Jolman. I have so many questions. As I was reading, your book, The Sex Talk You Never Got, and seeing some of your work, just so much exploded in me. And I'm just thrilled to have this conversation. So first of all, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Carol. It is such an honor to come on and have this conversation. I intrigued with and drawn to your work as well. So I'm anticipating a rich conversation.
Yeah. I just want to dive right in with a claim you make that men have been oversexualized but underdeveloped sexually. I'm not sure if I got those words exactly right. So what do you mean by that? I think many of our listeners may say, well, we're a hypersexualized culture. Why would you say men need more talk about sex?
Yeah, being sexual, this probably goes without saying, but let me say it. Being sexual is not the same as being sexually mature. Right there, we have this assumption, unfortunately, that it sort of runs itself, right? That you don't really need much of a sex talk. Once you get the anatomy down, you're good to go, right? Pat on the back and go get him, tiger. But that is not my experience of personally as a man, but also walking with men as a therapist. Is sexuality is often a place of great struggle, not just even sexual sin struggle, but just general struggle in relationship or navigating sex within a marriage relationship.
Yep.
I was at a Friendsgiving a couple years ago and talking with some dads there, and we were catching up. These were families that I don't see often. And so, I told the guys that I was writing this book, The Sex Talk You Never Got. And both guys, these other dads leaned in and said, can I have that book like yesterday? Right. And these are not men who are engrossed in sexual struggle or sexual sin per se, but just one of the guys said, sex has been one of the most difficult areas of my life, just stepping into it as a young man and then stepping into it in my marriage. So this under-sexually nurtured, it's not necessarily the need for just more sex or titillation, right? But the development of something really maturing. We talk about spiritual formation, but we don't talk often about sexual formation. And it's such a necessary category. As I know, I'm preaching to the choir here, but as you know, and again, this idea of being oversexualized, I think it comes, in a lot of ways, but obviously men are sold things through sexual titillation, right? And advertising and such. But on top of that, just this assumption that, men, that's all men want, right?
Yes.
Don't men just want sex?
Yes.
And I've never met a man that just wants sex. They always want more than that. Men want love. We're just as human as women. Obviously, there are nuances to masculinity and femininity, but we share this overwhelming amount of humanness. And we don't get that kind of humanized view of men. We get this, again, this sense of like, men, boys will be boys. They just want sex. Give them sex and they'll be fine. And that is so minimizing of men.
Yes.
So
Yes.
those two tensions, right, of men live with this pressure. And I actually have, clients who will say to me, I know I'm just supposed to, always be ready, or always, just always sort of able to just get it up and perform sexually. But I actually want the emotional stuff. I
Yeah.
want foreplay. I don't just want sex and release. I want more than that. And it's almost like they have to, do it in the secrecy of therapy. The confidentiality of therapy is like confess these things, as if it's just not welcome in the masculine culture. So
I'm so
those
glad you, yeah,
those
I'm
things,
so glad you said that men don't only want sex in the sense of just a biological phenomenon. I was
right?
working with a young lady just very recently who's around 30. She's got a boyfriend. She's not married. She's determined to walk out her sexuality as she understands God would have her. And she said, "What can I give to my boyfriend? I can't give him sex. What else can I do for him?"
Mm,
They're thinking about getting
wow.
married, but just the understanding that a man is more than his sexuality, it makes me think that we as women say that too many men objectify women for their bodies. Well, isn't the converse happening when we say men
Well
only
said.
want sex,
Right.
objectifying men?
Right. Well said. Right. There's a sense that men get objectified in that way as kind of this animalistic,
Yeah,
right, being that, they're pretty basic and, just throw them some sex once in a while. Exactly. We need, touch, love, affirmation, connection, deep conversation, relationship just as much
yes,
as women. And again, it's not that men maybe know how to ask for that or are socialized to welcome that in
yeah,
themselves.
yeah.
There's, you know, Dr. Sue Johnson, who's written a lot on adult attachment and marriage, has said in her research, she discovered that boys as infants and babies get held less
Mm,
than
mm,
girls do. And so even from the start, right, there's this sense of, boys don't need that stuff. Um, and that there's not an inherent lack of need. It's
yes.
just that there's a kind of socialized way that men get touched less as babies and boys, young boys. And, Sue Johnson said, she said, I was telling when my female clients come in and complain, he just wants sex or he's always interested in sex. She said, I would be too if sex was the only place I was allowed to ask for touch
Wow,
other than the football field.
wow, wow.
Yeah. In other words, again, this idea of men not having spaces or language or permission and or a felt sense of permission at least to ask for those sorts of things.
Yeah. My heart feels sad with that. And
Yeah.
you share so many vignettes and stories. Um, and what always strikes me as you were talking, as you write about these different stories, is just the sadness or grief or pain in a man's heart, whether or not
Yes.
he's having quotes enough physical acts of sex. It's the matters of the heart. And that's what
Right.
you were driving at, that we are getting beyond behaviors. We are talking about what's going on in a man's soul.
Yes. Yes. I come right out of the gate in the first chapter with a conversation on men are lovers.
Yes.
we
Yes.
we are made for all the sensuality and pleasures of the world, right? And again, that language right away feels like, what are you saying, men are lovers? Like,
Yes.
that feels instantly awkward in our masculine culture. Like, I had a young man say to me, gosh, that just feels so effeminate. And what a tragedy that being able to talk about things like being a lover, um, wanting deeper connection, feels effeminate.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we are sensual beings. We're
Yeah.
created for
Yeah.
all the sensuality of beauty. And, I think of, a friend that um, has become a connoisseur of um, he has a smoker. He got a smoker recently, right, for smoking meat. And he was talking to me about he made some meat for his son's graduation party. And I was like, this is really good. And he's like, it's okay. Right. And again, that was such a statement from an aficionado, right? Here's a man who's developing the sensuality
Yeah.
and the craft of smoking meat just right. Right. And if you talk to a man about that, or fly fishing, right, or these activities that men get engrossed in, there's such a sensual language and sensuality to how they embody those. But we just don't have that vernacular, right? It feels weird, but he's essentially talking about the development of his taste buds around he knows he can get the meat just a little better,
Mm.
right? Like, how do you know as a man a well done steak? It's your sensuality. It's also how when you walk in the door after work, something's not right,
Yeah.
right? With your children, or you pick them up from school and something's off, right? That's as much an intuition or sensuality or lover part of you as anything else. Is how you can pick up on things in relationship. It's also, why you might love, the smell of your wife's perfume or hair, or,
Yes.
just when you hug her close, right? That sensuality that makes you fall in love with the people in your life and God's world.
Yes.
Um, as much as taking in a beautiful sunset, or um again, a beautiful trout, right? If you're a fly fisherman, and that's all sensuality. So yes, I'm kicking open the door and saying, guys, we got to go here. We've got to recover this kind of self-ownership of our lover heart.
Mm. Beautiful. And of course, that gets wounded. We'll talk about that in a second. But as you talk about this sensuality part that God built within all of us, not only women, but as you're talking about men too, I can imagine that some men might say, well, I struggle with lust all the time. Isn't that my sensuality? And lust
Yeah.
is bad. Jesus said it's bad. We're warned about that. Can you unpack lust versus arousal versus sexual desire?
Yeah.
Not the same. Help guys understand that.
That's great. Yeah. So obviously, I would say our sexuality is built on our sensuality. So not all of life is sexual, but all of life can be sensual, right? And this connection to your body and its pleasures is the basis for your sexuality. It's what leads us into loving sex, falling in love, in itself.
Yeah.
But we have this, suspicion. I think, this is probably the place where men get damaged from purity culture, is this idea within the church, is this idea of, being suspicious of kind of everything that moves in you, right? So you're standing in line at the grocery store, or you're pumping gas and you see a beautiful woman, one lane over, one pump over, or, you're standing in line at Starbucks and you're next to somebody else waiting for the coffee, and you see, um, you're drawn to the beauty of this person, right? And you think, oh, that's lust, got to shut it down, right? And so you have your good training and you bounce your eyes, so to speak, right? I mean, there's such a sense uh of that suspicion, again, of our own bodies and what moves in us. And I'm saying in the book, that's not inherently lust.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to become lust.
Yeah.
That is simply your body responding to beauty. In this case, the beauty of another person or another woman, right? Is you're being moved by her beauty. And even, to feel what might feel like the beginnings of arousal, even sexually being moved by what you're experiencing. That is not inherently lustful. Arousal is a body state. It's simply your body responding to the presence of beauty in another person. And it can become lust, right? But that's arousal is about the body. Sexual desire is about the heart. So um, you know, you could kind of, oogle her and stare and objectify her and start to have, you know, create sexual fantasy and go down that and kind of gorge yourself in that moment.
Yeah.
In the words of Dan Allender, lust is desire gone mad.
Mhm.
So you can let yourself go mad and kind of gorge yourself, but you don't have to. Yeah, as I say in the book, you could be moved to something I call awe, which is this appreciation for the beauty and the glory of God coming through the beauty of this woman, this person. It doesn't have to go to lust. I had a friend that was telling me about he was drawn to Caitlin Clark, the now women's NBA star 3-point shooter and incredible athlete for the Indiana Fever. And this was during the NCAA tournament. And he said, I'm just drawn to watching her play basketball. And he was stepping back a little bit, like, it doesn't feel sexual. Like, I don't think I'm lusting, but I'm also very drawn to her.
Yeah.
And I said, I think you're just experiencing awe.
Yeah.
Right? You're just moved by her finesse on the court, her obvious capacity to play basketball well. She is a delight to watch. In terms of her kind of prowess on the court. So, and he said, yes, I think that's it. I'm just moved by her. So I'm inviting men to take a breath in that moment. When you are moved by the beauty of a woman,
Yeah.
You don't have to instantly shut that down. In fact, if you do, you're probably creating this body confusion, which is you're probably opposing something of your design. If you just instantly shut it down, to let it like pause. It's okay to be moved by beauty. It's okay to even feel some sense of arousal. But don't move towards lust. Move towards awe.
Yeah.
Move towards a kind of gratitude for the beauty of God in another person.
That's good. That's good. It occurs to me that that can apply in marriage too. You talk about lust diminishing and awe expanding who we are and the
Yeah.
relationships. If a husband interacts with his wife such that I want to consume you when it's all about me, that can be lust even in a marriage where
Right.
awe and the healthy desire, it can expand him and the relationship.
Yes. Well said. One of my favorite quotes from sex researcher and educator Emily Nagoski. She says, describing that very thing, she says, your partner is not an animal to be hunted for sustenance,
Ah,
but a secret keeper whose mysterious depths are infinite. I'm like,
oh,
wow. I mean, that
oh,
is
oh,
right. It's a mic
yes.
drop, right? In other words, sex is not a need that your partner becomes the sustenance for, right? That you have to hunt them and consume them, right? Like I've got this urge for sex and you're it, baby. So, give it to me, right? That kind of obligation, urge-based demand, there's nothing lover oriented about that. It does diminish you as a man as well as your wife down to some kind of exchange
Yeah.
of need or sustenance. In other words, as Emily is saying, sex is not a drive, it is a desire. It's not
Mm,
an urge like oxygen or food or shelter, right? It is a desire. So you won't die without it. And the more that you treat it as a desire within you, the more that you'll be able to, as you say, well, just said, well, right, to expand and explore and approach your partner
yeah.
as a mystery, to engage. And it makes sexual experience, you know, true lovemaking and this fuller pleasure. I read a research study where they were connecting the hormone oxytocin, which is released, right? It's called the cuddle hormone, and
Yep.
it's released when we bond with another human being, emotional connection. So, mother to infant when
Yep.
she's nursing,
Yep.
gets a burst of oxytocin both in the infant and the mother, but it's also released in large quantities during sex
Mhm.
or orgasm. And um, the study was saying they believe the stronger the amount of oxytocin, the more powerful the orgasm experience. So, in other words, the closer you are, the more emotionally connected you are to your partner, the stronger your pleasure in sex. So, in other words, it's again, if you treat it as an exchange, you're missing out on this whole other world of pleasure that's available.
Yeah. I know some guys would challenge you on what you just said, and you probably have had them challenge you directly that sex is not a need. I have both single and married men write to me and say, because I have made the same claim. They say, "Well, you don't understand a man's body. It is a need.
Mm-hmm.
I have to." They're talking about the physical sensations, and I respond to them challenging that. You have made a claim also that sex is not a need, and I just want to invite you to explore that a little bit more, because I'm sure every man who is listening or watching feels that in his body. What do you mean that's not a need?
Yeah, uh, most times when guys say that, what I think there is happening inside, obviously our body interacts with our hormones, and so
Yeah.
this buildup of testosterone, or the buildup of sperm can feel like, I need to have release.
Yep.
And again, your body gives you natural release through a wet dream, nocturnal emission. So your body's going to take care of itself, and it's recycling sperm. And so you're not in any physical
Yep.
danger
Yep.
of getting any sort of physical harm to yourself. It might feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but again, a lot of times what I think happens here is men are actually needing some form of emotional
Yes.
regulation.
Yes, you make
So
that. Yeah, I wrote down that quote that when men are struggling with their sexual stuff, what they're really seeking is emotional regulation. That's where they have
yes,
not been trained, discipled, matured.
right. Like, how do you as a man come down from your stress?
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times the things that are afforded men are alcohol use or some form of sexual acting out, right? To soothe your body. And there are few things that, again, in this kind of masculine culture way, you think of, like, I live in the West in Colorado, and these mining towns, right? What was given to men? They're pushed hard all day, forced to shut down their bodies, work, 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 mine, mine, mine. What were they given at night? A saloon and a
Yep.
brothel,
Yep.
right? In other words, here are the two things we're going to give you to soothe your body
Mhm.
after you've pushed it so hard. A brothel, sex, release, or alcohol, which, by the way, neither of them ultimately are going to help you emotionally regulate in a healthy way. Just getting sexual release, yes, it is a vasodilator. You will feel relaxants in your body. You will come down in a physical sense, but it's not. There's a man, Stephen Porges, developed a theory called polyvagal theory about emotional regulation, how you soothe your body or come down from your stress. He said the strongest way to soothe is in human relationship. So not simply getting physical release through
Yes.
sex, right? But actually having deep conversation, connecting with another human being is one of the most powerful ways we can de-stress ourselves. So I think, again, some of what gets confused, I think, when men say, what are you talking about? It's not a need. I absolutely need it, right? Is this again, this sense of emotional dysregulation. They're stressed, and sex works in a certain way to release and de-stress their bodies. Um, I had a woman who's given me permission to share this story, a client, and she said, I always knew what kind of day my husband had by how he had sex with me that night.
Yes.
And she would say there were nights where it just felt like I was the thing he needed to conquer because he had a bad day.
Mm.
In other
Mm.
words, this was
Wow.
not, and she said, and there was a sense of I couldn't interrupt and ask for him to be more gentle or kind, right? He just needed to get it out, so to speak. And she's like,
Mm.
it was all about his day. It
Yeah.
was all about his stress. That was not lovemaking,
Right.
right? That was him essentially using her to be a little bit more than just masturbation for himself, right? He was not connecting to her. He was not relating to her. Um, there's research on even using a partner for auto regulation, which is another way of saying self-regulation. In other words, you're not really connecting to your partner. You're just using her as a kind of glorified masturbation.
Mm.
So
Mm.
awful, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying that's every man. Um, that was certainly this man. But again, back to that sense of maybe what you're needing is soothing. Love is actually a need.
Yes.
Love is a drive. Intimacy is a drive. Sex is not.
Mm.
So, sometimes I wonder for men if that's actually what's being felt in the body is I'm dysregulated, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to blow, right? And I need somewhere to be
Yep.
brought down. And it's
Yep.
like, yeah, that's emotional regulation. That's not sex drive.
Yes. Thank you for going there, because
Yes.
I think there are a lot of people who get hung up there. There's
Yes.
another significant category that I really appreciate how you dealt with in your writing. You say evil hates your sexuality, evil wants to kill the lover in you. You talk about how arousal and shame get connected and the kind of harm. You tell story after story of men who have experienced harm in their sexuality. Uh, Huge. I certainly would
Yeah.
agree that evil hates your sexuality. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah. The hardest, two verses in the Bible for all of us at some level are, and we have this false separation in Genesis
Yeah.
2 and 3, where it says, Adam and Eve were naked and felt no shame. And then the next chapter starts, chapter 3 of Genesis. Now the serpent was more crafty
Yeah.
than all of the wild animals. And, we almost think like, well, the curtain closed on Adam and Eve and they enjoyed their naked, shame-free sexuality. And then eventually the serpent came along. If you take out the verse division there, I mean, it is the next verse. In other words, Adam and Eve were naked and felt no shame. And it is a powerfully erotic and moving scene. And now the serpent is literally the next sentence.
Yes.
So at some level, evil came so quickly against Adam and Eve to assault their naked, vulnerable sexuality and connection and intimacy,
Yes.
uh, and shame-free intimacy. And
Yeah.
what does evil do? Uh, tempts them to sin, but invites shame
Yep.
over their nakedness.
Yep.
Um, in other words, at some level, evil hated Adam and Eve's naked freedom, and
Yes.
evil hates yours and
Yes.
comes early in all of our stories to try to get us, uh, to not experience sexuality. Song of Songs has this beautiful line, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. And there's this sense of our sexuality was meant to awaken in us with this kind of innocent wonder and wow, right? The invitation into innocent love and an innocent discovery of our own bodies.
Yeah.
our own pleasure and sexuality in that. And instead, evil comes to try to attack that so that we, from the time we're kind of awakened in puberty hormonally to our sexuality, we're already, feeling shame over our bodies or our sexual curiosity or our sexual experience, or we've experienced something like sexual abuse that has intruded upon us and awakened us in a relationship of harm. And so evil will do almost anything to try to get us to surrender that innocent, playful pleasure and awe for our own bodies and the awakening of sexuality. So yeah, I tell stories of men, and it can be as obviously as horrific as something like sexual abuse, overt sexual abuse, which is 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 men. Although that statistic is almost assuredly low,
Yep.
given that men are 4 times less willing to admit their own sexual abuse. So that's a lot of men just right there who have overt sexual abuse. But then you just mark the kind of more subtle moments where shame is introduced. I tell a story in the book about my own curiosity where I was told on the playground what sex is. And it was a wild tale from a classmate who told me what sex was. And I was troubled by his, he got it wrong, but he, and, he, interestingly, I've reflected on that story, and I actually think it may have been his own reflections on having viewed pornography, because he had a way of interpreting it that clearly somebody didn't tell him. He'd made it up in a way, but he had enough knowledge to see it. I don't know that for a fact, but there's a sense of even he had experienced harm.
Yes.
And was sexualized early. Through pornography viewing. And that's a pause there. That's a common experience. A lot of men's experience of first viewing pornography is the story of sexual harm in itself. Mm-hmm. Meaning, my client who, when he was 8, went into his parents' bathroom, which was kind of in their bedroom right away. And when he was 8, went in there and discovered stacks of his dad's pornography, right? I mean, that is the careless and reckless exposure to sexualizing an 8-year-old boy. Yeah. And that's harm. That was not him being protected. Yes. And it could be as simple as, an older boy that shows you porn on their phone or in a magazine, right? There's a invitation that sexualizes you. And before you have the choice to really consent to you're being invited to. So anyway, that story though, I got this story of sex from this boy on the playground who I think was sexualized early. So I went home to my mother, told her the story, and it's a silly story and I tell it in the book, but of what sex was. It was childlike in itself. But the next week we were at a play date and she invited me into the kitchen from playing and she said, tell her friend, tell us that story again of what you heard on the playground. And I didn't really understand what was being asked of me. I didn't get the punchline, in other words. And so I told them again this crazy view of sex, and they both burst out laughing. And it's, at some level, it is comical, what I was told. The difficulty is I didn't know the punchline.
Yes. And your heart, the shame and trauma, just to hear you tell it.
Yes. And I burst out laughing or burst out crying as they're laughing. And, my mother hugged me and comforted me, but there was still a sense of, I don't get what's going on here. And I remember feeling I need to put my curiosity away, my sexual curiosity away. I need to keep that to myself a little more
Yeah.
because I get laughed at
Yeah.
when I bring it out.
Yeah.
And um, that led, to again then operating with my sexuality more underground,
Yep.
and not this innocent, open-hearted discovery, but something I need to kind of hide. Um, so it's as simple or maybe as subtle. It's not simple, obviously, and the harm is not simple, but it's subtle, right? It's not necessarily overt abuse, um, that can bring shame. But evil would love you to bury your sexuality. It would love you to see it as something that you live out in silence and secrets, or not really connected to your lover heart, right? You kind of live it out more as the obligation you give your wife, or the thing you just don't ask for. Or, I know men that whose wives come in complaining, we never have sex because what they just take it to pornography. They don't want to risk it anymore
Yes.
in the
Yes.
open, in vulnerable relationships. So they'll just take care of it in pornography. I mean, that is devastating.
Yeah.
That men would bury that part of them because it's such a mirror. Our lover heart is really what we're meant to live out our sexuality from. It's also what we're meant to live out our hearts in relationship to our spirituality, a relationship with God as, um, a place of passion. And, that sexuality
Yeah.
mirrors that.
And Sam, you go there in the book, and I so appreciate this. And I'm going to say it this way, that God needs you as a man, humans in general, but you as a man, to be aroused, to be alive.
Yes.
And that seems so counter, but he made you that way. The
Yes.
world needs that.
That's
If
right.
you are married, your wife, your family needs that. Um,
Yes.
give some guys some hope that this is possible, that resurrection life can come here too.
Yes. Well, evil can never put the knife in your passionate lover heart and end it, right? Evil doesn't have that power to destroy that part of you. It can get you to disown it. It can get you to bury it in shame and believe lies about it. But
Good.
evil can never destroy your passionate, sexually passionate, even your aroused lover heart. And that is such good news. In other words, there is always hope
Yeah.
for some recovery, like passionate in alive recovery of your sexuality. Um, you were made to be a passionate lover of a woman, passionate lover of the world,
Yep.
passionate lover of other people. That passion the world needs, and it resides in your lover heart. Again, some might say, but my wife doesn't like my passion.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, well, there's a way to walk out that relationship struggle, right? And there are times that your passion may be too much for her trauma. Though it may not be too much for her, there are times that might trigger her, right? In other words, you have to honor she also has a story.
Yep.
And so, because guys might say, well, my wife doesn't like that. She doesn't like me wanting sex. And I would say again, you need to ask deeper questions there.
Mm-hmm.
What is it she doesn't like? What is it that it triggers in her? Maybe there's a way that you're embodying your sexuality that needs to be explored. But overall, your passion is needed in the world.
Yeah.
Loving men, will, strongly impact and change the world in which they live.
Yeah. It reminds me of so many of the descriptions of God's best friends in Scripture. Passionate lovers.
Yes.
As you talk about in the book, the lover heart is not the only part of a man that's needed, but you cannot fulfill what God has built you to do without that. It is an indispensable part of you.
Yeah.
I think in our Western uh, industrialized society, that's been lost. But look at
Right.
how God has dealt with human beings, and in particular men, throughout
Right.
history. It's been
Right.
that part of them.
That's right. Yes, right. Your job is probably not going to ask for the passionate lover.
Yep.
Your
Yep.
job's going to ask you to get stuff done, meet
Yep.
deadlines,
Yep.
and push through and probably push past even what's healthy for you at some level. Maybe you have a healthy boss and a healthy work environment, but you know, capitalistic industrial society will take what it can get from you, and it wants work.
Yeah.
Um, maybe it wants the artist a little bit in you, right? If you're in film or architectural design, it might want some aspects of your artistic self, your lover self, but not much,
Yeah.
right? And ultimately, it wants to use it to its end. Give
Yep.
us more, give us more. So yes, it is even more, as you're saying, well, why you need to focus on this area and care for the lover part of you, because it is what God wants from you. And it's what honestly probably drives the things you most want in
Yes.
life.
Yes.
It's meaningful moments of adventure and intimacy and play in the world.
Yeah. Sam, I feel like we've just gotten started.
Yes.
I have so many questions here. I think we could probably go twice as long, but I'm just going to give you an opportunity to invite people where they can connect with you. We'll sure make, links available in the show notes and under this video, but just invite people for more. I think this has just been like a wonderful
Yes.
appetizer.
Thank you. This has been such a great conversation. Well, certainly would love you to buy the book wherever you buy your books.
Yeah.
Would love you to partake of that. You can also there's a few order bonuses that are still available at my website. You can get a free extra copy of the book. So you could buy the Kindle version or the audiobook and get a paperback free from my publisher, which is amazing.
That's great.
I also wrote a little ebook, How to Give a Sex Talk, intended to help you kind of know what you missed or to help better have a conversation with your kids.
That's
And
awesome.
then I write on Substack. So I have an ongoing conversation there with readers, which I love. And we have regular Zoom conversations out of that where we can interact. So those would be great places. And I'm on Instagram or your favorite social media as well.
Uh, Sam, seriously, that I feel like this has just whetted my appetite for even more, and I know it has to our listeners too. Many blessings to you in your work and your family and your lover heart and helping
Thank you,
other men
Carol.
recover theirs.
Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for caring about the sexuality of men. It means a lot.
Do check the links under this video, friend. We have the links to Sam's website, to his book, The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality, and his social media and related things. Yes, you need to check this out. If you are a wife and your husband is open to processing some of this with you, this would also be a great gift for him. This is a very compassionate book. As you heard Sam talking, this isn't about, oh, you bad boy, don't do that. This is getting at the deep places in a man's soul. And if you as a wife happen to be still watching this, you might want to involve your husband in Sam's work and get the book. I would also invite you to come to our website, yoursexpectations.com, for my book, Sexpectations, Reframing Your Good and Not So Good Stories About God, Love, and Relationships, a way of looking at your sexual story in particular and inviting Jesus into your story for true, lasting transformation. I know you will find that meaningful. Thanks again for being with me. I hope you're subscribed so you can get this material, be notified every time we upload another episode. And until next time, may God bless you.